Hazel reclined in her chic New York City apartment, the distant noise of traffic fading into the background. She took a slow sip of wine, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of anticipation and mischief. Across from her, Damon, her lover, lounged on the couch, his toned frame exuding casual confidence. A lazy grin played on his lips as he looked at her. "You really don't need to worry about money," Hazel said, placing her glass on the table. Her voice was smooth, steady, and brimming with confidence. "My husband is my paycheck. He'll cover everything. You just need to keep being irresistible and make me happy whenever I want." Damon raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "You think he's never going to catch on?" Hazel crossed her legs, leaning back with a dismissive chuckle. "Adrian? Not a chance. He's buried so deep in his work that I'm practically invisible to him. To him, I'm the perfect wife, the ideal accessory for company events. He has no idea." Damon shook his head, chuckling softly. "And what if he figures it out?" "He won't," Hazel replied, waving the idea away. "The man practically lives at the office. I'm just part of his success story, nothing more." Damon stood, closing the space between them in a few steps. He took the wineglass from her hand and placed it on the table, leaning closer. His voice dipped, playful yet probing. "And what does that make you?" Hazel's lips curved into a sly smile as she locked eyes with him. "A woman who knows exactly what she wants." Damon's hands found her shoulders, drawing her nearer. "And what do you want?" he murmured, his voice low and enticing. She whispered, "I want Hawaii. I want luxury without lifting a finger." Damon needed no further persuasion. He kissed her softly, a gesture that spoke of the excitement and secrecy of their shared escape. The outside world melted away as they got lost in each other, their secret affair burning with intensity. Damon held her close, their connection undeniable as they shared a quiet moment of intimacy. Hazel's thoughts drifted briefly to the life they were planning together. She pictured the sun-drenched beaches of Hawaii, the luxurious resorts, and the lavish meals, all funded by Adrian's hard work. The thought sent a thrill through her as she clung to Damon. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her back to reality. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from Adrian. "Working late again. Don't wait up." She smirked, showing it to Damon. "See? He's completely clueless." Damon glanced at the phone and then back at her, his grin growing. "Hawaii it is then," he murmured. "Absolutely," she breathed, closing her eyes as she leaned into him. "Hawaii." As their evening continued, the pair discussed their plans in greater detail. Damon pulled up a travel app on his phone, showing her options for resorts. "This one has a private beach, infinity pools, the works," he said, his tone brimming with excitement. Hazel leaned closer, her interest piqued. "It looks perfect. Days by the pool, nights, well, you know," Damon laughed, pulling her into an embrace. "I like the way you think. What about flights? When should we leave?" "Next week," she said without hesitation. "I'll tell Adrian it's a girls' trip. He won't question it." Damon nodded, already finalizing their arrangements on his phone. "Done. I'll book everything tonight." Hazel smiled, envisioning herself basking in the Hawaiian sun, far from the monotony of her life in New York. Adrian, as always, would be too engrossed in his career to even notice her absence. For her, it was the perfect escape, luxury and freedom wrapped in one beautiful package. The hours stretched on as they continued planning, their excitement growing with each new detail. They talked about the adventures they'd have, the restaurants they'd try, and the unforgettable moments they'd create. For Hazel, it felt like a dream unfolding, her fantasy paid for by a man who barely noticed her existence anymore. As the clock struck midnight, Damon stood and stretched, his movements relaxed and satisfied. Hazel stretched out on the plush couch, her eyes following Damon as he stood to leave. He lingered near the door, his tone hesitant but playful. "I should go," he said, though there was little conviction in his voice. "We both need some rest." With a pout, Hazel tugged on his arm, a mischievous glint in her eye. "You don't have to leave. Stay the night. You know I want to, but we shouldn't push our luck. The neighbors might start to wonder." Hazel sighed, reluctantly letting him go. "Fine, but promise me you'll come back tomorrow. We still have so much to finalize." Damon smiled, his hand lingering on her cheek. "You can count on it." He opened the door, pausing for a moment to glance back at her before stepping out into the hallway. As the door clicked shut, Hazel felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. Everything was falling perfectly into place. Her plans for a dream vacation, her intoxicating time with Damon, and a blissfully unaware husband. Picking up her phone, she scrolled through her messages with Adrian. The exchanges were brief, professional, and almost mechanical. He rarely had time for more, too preoccupied with his work. Hazel smirked as she typed a quick message. "Just finished up here. See you tomorrow, maybe." Within seconds, Adrian responded, "Sure, big presentation in the morning. Don't stay up too late." She shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. He was so predictable, so utterly consumed by his job. Did he even remember the last time they'd taken a vacation together? Or had he noticed how distant she had grown? Pushing those thoughts aside, she slipped under the covers, her mind already drifting to Hawaii. She imagined warm sand beneath her toes, the soothing sound of waves, and Damon's arms around her. It was everything she had been missing for years. The Hawaiian sun was unrelenting, its golden rays casting a brilliant glow over the pristine beaches of Maui. Hazel and Damon had settled into a private cabana, where attentive staff ensured their glasses were never empty. The tropical scent of flowers mingled with the salty ocean breeze, creating an intoxicating sense of paradise. Hazel stretched out on a chaise lounge, letting the sun's warmth seep into her skin. A contented sigh escaped her lips. "This is perfect," she murmured, tracing her fingers along Damon's arm. Damon turned to her, his grin widening. "All thanks to your paycheck back home, right?" She chuckled, her laughter blending with the rhythmic crash of waves. "Exactly. And the best part? Adrian's probably stuck in some dreary office, completely oblivious to our little paradise. He doesn't know what he's missing." Their days on the island were filled with indulgence and adventure. Mornings were spent on secluded beaches, afternoons reserved for gourmet meals at high-end restaurants, and evenings alive with music and dancing. Damon's knack for discovering the finest spots added an extra layer of excitement to every moment. One day, as they sipped fresh pineapple cocktails, Hazel surveyed the luxurious surroundings. "I've never experienced anything like this before," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It feels like living in a dream." Damon smirked, his hand finding hers. "You deserve it. We've earned this, haven't we?" She leaned back, half closing her eyes as she absorbed the view. "Definitely. It's such a relief to escape everything. Adrian, work, all the stress." Damon entwined his fingers with hers. "Here, it's just us. No worries, no distractions." Their adventures ranged from snorkeling in vibrant coral reefs to taking breathtaking helicopter tours of the island. Each night, they returned to their cabana with stories of their day, sharing laughter and stolen kisses under the stars. One evening, after a day spent exploring hidden coves, they settled into their cabana just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in fiery hues of orange and pink, casting a romantic glow over the beach. Hazel rested her head on Damon's shoulder, watching the sun sink into the ocean. "I'm so happy," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. "I don't want this to end." Damon wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "Who says it has to?" Hazel closed her eyes, savoring his warmth. "You're right. We'll make this last forever." As the stars began to dot the sky, Damon's voice broke the comfortable silence. "Have you thought about what comes next?" he asked, his tone casual yet probing. Hazel shrugged, her fingers idly tracing patterns on his chest. "Not really. I'm just enjoying the moment." Damon nodded. "Fair enough. But when we get back, we'll have to figure out how to keep this going." She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "You mean us or the lifestyle?" "Both," Damon said with a grin. "I don't want to let any of this slip away." Her lips curled into a mischievous smile. "Well, Adrian's oblivious, so that's a start." Damon's hand moved to her face. "We'll make it work. Whatever it takes." Their conversation shifted to dreams and future plans, their voices mingling with the gentle rhythm of the waves. Together, they envisioned new adventures, new luxuries, and a shared life far removed from the responsibilities and monotony of the one Hazel had left behind. Hazel felt completely immersed in the fantasy. Every day was an adventure, every moment an opportunity to revel in the forbidden. The combination of secrecy, luxury, created an intoxicating experience she wasn't ready to let go of. That night, she reflected on the perfection of it all. This trip had been everything she'd dreamed of. a getaway that awakened her senses and made her feel alive. She knew reality would eventually intrude, bringing her back to the routine and choices she had tried to escape. But for now, she clung to the bliss of the moment. The return to New York brought Hazel crashing back to reality, though her heart still soared with the memories of Maui. As the plane taxied to the gate, her thoughts were alive with ideas for future trips. The vacation had cemented her feelings for Damon and heightened her desire to prolong their intoxicating escape. As they made their way through the terminal, Hazel turned to Damon, her eyes glinting with excitement. "We should start planning our next trip, maybe somewhere even more exotic." Damon smiled, but a flicker of hesitation crossed his face. "Let's let things settle first. We need to stay under the radar for a while." Hazel dismissed his concern with a wave of her hand, her mind racing with possibilities. Adrian won't notice anything. He's too buried in work to have a clue. They parted ways outside the terminal, Damon heading to his apartment while Hazel took a cab back to her brownstone. As her home came into view, she immediately noticed something was wrong. A moving truck was parked outside, and strangers carried boxes and furniture from her house. Her heart pounded as confusion turned to dread. "What's going on?" she asked one of the movers as she stepped out of the cab. The man shrugged, looking puzzled. "We're finishing up here. The new family is about to move in." "New family?" Hazel's voice rose in disbelief. "This is my house." The mover gestured toward the door. "You should talk to them." Hazel stormed up the steps, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She flung open the door, her breath catching as she took in the nearly empty rooms. Everything that made the house her home was gone, replaced by scattered boxes and strangers' belongings. In the middle of the living room stood a young couple, hand in hand and beaming. "You must be the previous owner," the woman said kindly. "We just bought the house last week. The realtor told us you'd already moved out." Hazel's voice shook as she responded. "There must be a mistake. I didn't sell this house." The man frowned, pulling out a folder and flipping through paperwork. "The sale went through 2 weeks ago. Your husband handled everything." Her stomach dropped as the words hit her. Adrian had sold their house, without telling her. Panic surged as she bolted outside, her hands shaking while she pulled out her phone. She dialed Adrian's number, but it rang endlessly without an answer. She tried again, her frustration growing with each failed attempt. Desperately, she opened her banking app, and her blood ran cold. Every account was empty. Everything was gone. Her home, her money, her security. Adrian had taken it all. Racing back to the house, Hazel demanded answers from the young couple. "Do you know where he is? Did he leave any information?" The couple exchanged uneasy glances. "We don't know," the woman said hesitantly. "The realtor handled everything." Hazel slumped against the doorframe, her mind spinning. Betrayal, anger, and fear swirled inside her as she tried to process what had happened. The man she thought she knew had upended her life without warning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty house, Hazel forced herself to think. She needed answers, and quickly. She hurried back to the cab and instructed the driver to take her to the nearest police station. At the precinct, she explained her situation, her voice trembling as she recounted the events. "My husband sold our house and emptied our bank accounts. I don't know where he is." The officer took her information, nodding sympathetically but offering little assurance of immediate help. Bureaucracy moved slowly, and Hazel left the station feeling more lost than ever. Standing on the sidewalk outside, she stared into the night, her mind a whirlwind of unanswered questions and uncertainty about what to do next. Determined to find Adrian, Hazel launched her own investigation, starting with a visit to the realtor's office. The receptionist, though sympathetic, offered little information. "He handled everything via email and phone," she explained. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, Hazel pressed on, calling her lover Damon in desperation. But he didn't answer. She didn't even know where he was living. Alone and overwhelmed, she checked into a small motel, her once glamorous life reduced to stark simplicity. As days turned into weeks, Hazel's search consumed her entirely. She contacted old friends, colleagues, and anyone who might have interacted with Adrian recently. She filed a police report, but the lack of solid leads left progress frustratingly slow. Every day became a routine of phone calls, visits to Adrian's usual haunts, and relentless online searches. One day, while combing through old emails, Hazel discovered a message from Adrian's former business partner. It was an innocuous note about a missed business meeting, but it mentioned a foreign conference Adrian was supposed to attend. Her heart raced at the possibility that Adrian had fled abroad. She researched the conference and pinpointed a small town where it had taken place. Clinging to this lead, she scraped together her remaining resources and booked a flight. The trip yielded nothing. Hazel returned, defeated but not broken. As she sat in her modest room, the contrast between her Hawaiian escape and her current reality struck her deeply. Life had unraveled with brutal speed, but she resolved to press on, refusing to let Adrian's betrayal define her future. Damon eventually reached out, coming to see her at her motel. He tried to comfort her, but the strain of their new reality was evident. The extravagant lifestyle they had once shared was a distant memory, and the weight of their struggles began to take its toll. "We need to talk," Damon said one evening, his voice heavy with frustration. They sat in the cramped motel room, the bills piled high on the table between them. "What is it?" Hazel asked, her gaze fixed on the growing heap of overdue notices. "I can't keep doing this," Damon said, rubbing his temples. "We're out of money. If we don't figure something out, I don't see how this can work." Hazel looked up, desperation in her eyes. "I'm trying, Damon. I've hired a private investigator. I'm doing everything I can to find Adrian." Damon's expression softened, but the weariness remained. "It's been weeks, Hazel. Nothing's come up. I don't know how much longer I can keep going like this." Her voice cracked as she replied, "I can't give up. I have to find him." Hazel's search became her sole focus. She poured every penny into the investigation, selling off her remaining possessions and maxing out credit cards to keep going. Days blurred into weeks and then into months. But Adrian remained a ghost. Even the diligent private investigator found no trace of him. As her resources dwindled, Hazel's once glamorous lifestyle became a distant memory. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with her fall from grace. Her social circle evaporated, leaving her isolated. Even Damon, her last connection to her former life, grew weary. The constant financial strain and emotional turmoil eroded their relationship. One evening, he packed his belongings and left without looking back. The years that followed were brutal. 11 long years passed, each one harder than the last. Hazel's life became a daily fight for survival, living on the streets, begging for food, and seeking refuge in shelters. Despite everything, she never abandoned her search for Adrian. Hope, however faint, kept her going. One bitter winter day, a lead reignited that hope. A tip suggested that Adrian had been seen in a small, picturesque town abroad. With what little she had saved, Hazel booked a flight, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and anticipation. The town was quiet and charming, a stark contrast to the chaos of her former life. Wandering its narrow streets, she finally found a modest house on the outskirts. The sight before her stopped her in her tracks. Adrian was in the yard, playing with 2 young children. The scene was serene, almost idyllic. Hazel's heart sank as she took it all in. Adrian had moved on. He had remarried and built a life she had once dreamed of, a life that was now completely out of her reach. Hazel stood at the edge of the small town, watching Adrian's new life unfold before her eyes. The laughter of his children and the warmth radiating from his new wife struck her like a tidal wave. Jealousy and loss swirled within her, but it was the stark realization that her old life was irretrievably gone that cut the deepest. Summoning what courage she had left, she decided to confront him. She waited until Adrian was alone, catching him on his walk home from work. Her heart raced as she stepped out of the shadows. "Adrian!" she called, her voice trembling. "It's me. I've been searching for you for so long." Adrian froze, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition. For a brief moment, his face flickered with confusion, then hardened into cold detachment. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone icy. Hazel's voice cracked as she pleaded, "I came to find you. I need to talk to you. I've been through so much. Please, let's talk. Let's start over." Adrian's face remained impassive. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choices, Hazel. You walked away from everything." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out to him, desperate to bridge the chasm between them. "Please, Adrian, I made mistakes, but I never meant for this to happen. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me?" His gaze was unyielding. "I've moved on. I'm happy now. You should do the same. There's nothing left here for you." His words hit her like a hammer. shattering the fragile hope she'd clung to. Left alone in the fading light, Hazel watched as Adrian walked away, his figure retreating into the warmth of the life he had built without her. The rejection and the reality of her choices settled heavily on her shoulders. With no other option, she turned and walked back to the shelter where she had been staying, the cold winter wind biting at her skin. The following days were a blur of introspection and grief. Hazel wandered aimlessly through the small town, her mind replaying the confrontation and the years that had led to this moment. She found herself drawn to a quiet park overlooking the ocean. There, on a weathered bench, she sat and stared at the horizon. The rhythmic crashing of waves against the rocks provided an oddly soothing backdrop to her turmoil. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Hazel allowed herself to cry. There was no one to witness her despair, only the vast, indifferent ocean. Her tears fell freely, a culmination of years of regret, struggle, and heartbreak. The luxury she had once reveled in felt like a distant dream, and the people who had filled her life, Adrian, Damon, were now just shadows in her memory. For hours, Hazel sat in silence, contemplating the choices that had brought her here. The fight, the desperation, and the endless search had left her exhausted. As the night grew darker, a strange sense of calm settled over her. In her solitude, she found a peculiar kind of peace. She closed her eyes, focusing on the symphony of the ocean, the waves, the wind, and the distant calls of seabirds. It felt like a lullaby, offering her solace in her darkest moment. A passerby, a man walking his dog, paused briefly. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Hazel looked up, her eyes swollen from crying. "I'm fine," she replied softly. "Just needed some time alone." The man hesitated but nodded before continuing on his way. The fleeting interaction reminded her of the world's indifference, her struggles, her pain. It was all insignificant in the grand scheme of things. The realization brought a strange sense of liberation. As the park emptied, Hazel made her decision. She rose from the bench, her legs heavy with the weight of her resolve. The ocean behind her faded into darkness, its relentless rhythm a fitting metaphor for the unyielding march of time. She took one last look at the vast expanse, before turning and walking away. The world would go on without her, and perhaps, in its indifference, it was better that way. Hazel's life had been defined by choices, mistakes, and the consequences of both. But as she embraced the quiet finality of her journey, she found a semblance of peace in letting go. The echoes of her past would fade, and the world, indifferent as ever, would continue its relentless pace.